My fear is that my sons will never understand me. Oh, Diane, we've won again. This is good. But what is best in life?
Crush your enemies. See them driven before you.
Wrong! Zatanna, what is best in life?
Twirl to a swarm eared noid a call.
That is good. That is good. Yo-ho and hello. It's a lovely day here in Bardic Lands. Some might even call it cracking. And since I've got my nice sharp unboxing knife close to hand, I think it must be time for another cracking unboxing and review, no less, of a figure. And falling under the ministrations of the knife today is Zatanna, a superhero from DC Comics. And, you know, I know she doesn't look much like a superhero, but I have assurances from certain quarters that she is. I've handled this sort of box before, so this should pose no challenge. Now, I have to be honest with you, I'm not very familiar with this character. Now, beyond the fact that I know she does magic by talking backwards, but other than that, I don't really know that much about her. It's probably because I don't read a lot of American comics, specifically superhero ones. Now, we're treading familiar ground here again because, obviously, this is another Kotobukiya Bishoujo statue designed by that cryptic Shunya Yamashita fellow, who I have to wonder, is he some sort of significant figure in the realm of Japanese Bishoujo art? Did he pioneer some of the techniques? Is he a known figure? Could he perhaps be the Frank Frazetta of this style of art in Japan? Who knows? Well, I don't know. I did a Google search and I couldn't find much about the man at all. Oh, gee, come on. Tally-ho! Ooh. Lovely. There's a magic wand in here. I'm going to get that out first. Now, I'm thinking of putting sticky tape on the list next to plastic. Ah, there we go. Yeah. I find myself encountering an overabundance of plastic. You're stuck on your base. Well, this is weird. She is fixed to the base. You know, we've gone from magnets to having no choice in the matter. Actually, there is a screw in the bottom there. I guess it's not all bad news for those people who like to make their own bases for these things. I'm sure there's some of those flying around. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it happens. Now, I think this wand need go in here. As easy as that. Well, that's the least assembly-intensive figure on record. I may close early today. Oh boy, Zatanna. Okay, full disclosure here. This quickly became my very favourite Kotobukiya figure, whether we're talking about ones that I own or ones that I've seen around the land. This one is the tops. Now, I'm not going to try and convince you that it's the best one, strictly speaking, but it's my favourite. Now, that might seem strange considering that I don't know the character. But that's down to me not being into superhero comics. I know all the main players, of course, but I seriously blank on the B-listers, which Zatanna, or Zati, as I like to call her, certainly is. So why would I even get a figure of a character that I don't know, and there's a chance I wouldn't even like if I did? Well, I wanted her in my collection for one simple reason. I really love her costume. Not just because it looks good, but because it's got roots, man. If you were going to make a figure of a character, having a subject like Zati here, who has such a clear, distinctive look, must feel like such an advantage. You're virtually halfway there, right out of the gate. The technical work on this figure measures up to Kotobukiya's usual standard of well-hidden seams and the right amount of detail. You know what I mean, just enough to give it some nice visual texture, but not so much that you can't tell what's supposed to be going on, like with this musty old Spawn figure I found in my shed. The sculpting on Zatiwati is nice, clean and precise. Now, Shunya Yamashita's design is realised very well, but I have to give proper credit where it's really due. Her sculptor was a fellow called Takaboku Busujima. Sorry, it's just a really Japanese name. He's done a very admirable job, and as a matter of fact, he doesn't get anywhere near enough credit on the box. His name is only mentioned in tiny print right round the back, and it's hyphenated too, in a staggering display of disregard for what I hold to be the major hand behind the figure's overall quality. He deserves to have his name in capitals, right next to Yamashita, because like writers and artists in comic books, it takes both designer and sculptor to make this stuff work. Not to mention letterers and editors in comics, but whatever, I'm taking the comparison too far. Suffice it to say that the sculptor is the guy who makes the design work and brings the character to life, and that's what's happening here. Zati features another instance of a different material being used to complement the model. Nothing as extravagant as we saw on the mighty Conan, and any comparison, of course, wouldn't be fair. But there is some mesh material put to good use on Zati's legs to make clear her fishnet stockings. This was totally the right choice. I shudder to think of fishnets being detailed directly onto the model. Even if the sculpting was on point, the painting certainly wouldn't be. And so, here we are, well served once more by some of this so-called mixed media. The density of the pseudo-fishnets does a decent job of darkening Zati's skin tone, and well it should, but nowhere near the degree of Yamashita's artwork, in which he has employed a nylon subtexture to achieve a darkening effect that really seems as though it would be difficult, if not outright impossible, to achieve on the model itself. The cheater. The only other notable difference in the final piece is the missing detail and colouring inside Zatanna's hat. Obviously, I would have loved to see it there, but it's not a huge deal. But speaking of the hat, I can really see how someone might critique this figure for not having something coming out of it, like doves or a rabbit or whatever. And initially, I thought that way as well. But eventually, I decided that the figure is much better off without it. This is due to the fact that Zati dresses like a stage magician, but she does actual wizardy magic. Something like doves or whatnot would undermine that and plant her squarely in the stage magician territory. Conversely, if something clearly impossible and magic-y were going on, then I think it would have been much too vulgar a display of power. No matter how well it might directly illustrate the really interesting connection this character seems to represent between the illusion of magic and its actual presence, we're much better off overall with Zati's powers left to the imagination, as they were with Jubilee. Besides, with nothing there, a clever boy can have it both ways, like so. Oh aye, the Lady of the Lake, her arm clad in shimmering samite. No wait, I've got a better one.
Crush your enemies.
One other thing I'd like to mention is her base. It's gold! Now, I wouldn't have thought that colour would work, but it actually does. Well, that's not the thing, though. The thing is this double Z symbol bossed onto it. Is that actually her symbol? Now, I know I don't really know the character, but it doesn't seem to suit her at all. It looks like the kind of logo that you would give a giant robot.
From the minds of mortal men, the mightiest of machines.
But whatever, no matter what was going on with the hat or the base, I would have bought this figure because I loved this costume. Matter of fact, it serves the figure very well as an example of the importance of colour. Before I talk about the good stuff, let's be clear. You aren't going to see any fancy pants highlighting on Zatanna's costume, and this is because the figure's dominant colour, as you can see, is black, the final boss of highlighting. Believe me, I know, highlighting black was one of the first real hurdles I had in learning to paint miniatures, and I still mess it up. I don't expect a figure of this scale and standard to even attempt to highlight this volume of black. In all honesty, it would only be worth doing if the figure really needed to control the light source or generate visibility artificially like the two-dimensional concept art does. Instead, it relies on ambient light to let you see the figure's details. But the simple, generic strength of the costume is such that your brain easily fills in the gaps and makes it clear what you're looking at, even from across the room. Now, there is a little bit of a downside at hand. In typical tricksy magician fashion, Zati clearly wants all our attention squarely on that hat. I stand by what I said earlier about powers being well left to the imagination, but nonetheless, here's the issue. Not only does the lack of internal colour and detail bite pretty hard here in the hat, the ambient light reveals the interior to not even be hat-shaped. No doubt technical limitations came into play here, but these things are usually hidden rather than presented to us. It stands out because this spot really needed some proper contrast, and this on a costume that otherwise is an example of contrast done well. Look at how these areas of bright red and stark white, and even this pale sort of yellow in the middle, cut right through the void-like black, giving it shape some definition and preventing the all-important silhouette from being lost in a murky labyrinth of black and dark and bleh. Too much black and other dark colours is just the bane of character figures, because without some nice bright contrasts, you just can't see it, and it sinks into the visibility bog with Geralt and his griffin and Spawn. But Zati? Oh no, her costume is amazing. In fact, the figure owes more to this costume than is immediately evident.
It would not be anywhere near as good if they'd gone with this costume, which is fine enough in and of itself, but ultimately it falls short. It's much more overtly a superhero costume, and thus it loses the connection to the stage identity that makes the character so interesting in the first place. Just as importantly, Zatanna would lose her visual connection to her dad, Zatanna, whom I googled this afternoon. And without these traditional stage costumes, both of them would be divorced from a hero to whom they both owe a great debt. Mandrake the Magician. He's an ancient King Features character from the elder days of comics. There are some floating around who claim that he may even be the first ever superhero. Well, I don't know about that. All I know is that he was amazing on Defenders of the Earth.
Master of magic spells and illusion. Enemies crumble in fear and confusion. Mandrake, Defenders of the Earth.
I suppose I should talk about this pose. It's interesting because what they've gone with is arguably more of a dancer's pose than a magician's one. Now don't get me wrong, it looks good, and to change it would be to risk the whole figure, but it does make it seem as though there should be a whole chorus line of Zatannas. Yeah, maybe it's a marketing ploy. Well, it's no surprise overall, because this kind of costume seems to be more prevalent on chorus lines than magic shows. And that's okay, because both of those share the same kind of Las Vegas showbiz connection that overflows into the character. Compare it with this other Zati figure that I found a picture of. This is a good pose too, with many of the same strengths as the Kotobukiya figure, and the same strong showbiz connections. It might even be a little more magician-y in its austere posture. Look at it there, all mysterious. Well, you don't know what a magician is gonna do. Stock magician poses seem to be all the rage amongst Zatanna figures, for better or for worse. So I applaud Kotobukiya for going with a pose that carries forward the staginess of Zati's look without retreading too much ground. Besides, we all know these Bishoujo figures are really pin-ups at heart, and moving Zati a little closer to the dance side of the stage lets them achieve the traditional pin-up feature of showing off her caboose. When we looked at the Jason Voorhees statue, we learned that Kotobukiya will do this, literally, to a fault. But because Zatanna's tails are lifted as a continuous part of her dance-like motion, rather than just being hoisted on the mysterious winds of gratuity, the presence of her butt comes off as natural, rather than really contrived. And that, my friends, is a key difference between plain, half-baked cheesecake and something with a little bit of substance. And that matters. Right-ho, tally-ho, Zatanna, my favourite Kotobukiya figure, so far, and who among you can say otherwise? But I'm still looking for them to do better, because as much as I like this figure, it's still clearly not a patch on the likes of the Elf, or Tiki. And do we even dare speak of the glories that may be unleashed when someone finally gets around to making a figure of the dwarf? Matter of fact, that reminds me, where's my dwarf? You got a spell for that? Seru M. Fuad?